Celebrate the Art of Recovery Expo CARE 2021 sponsors. Presented by Community Bridges. Partner Hunkapi. Platinum sponsors Arizona Women's Recovery Center, Molina Healthcare, Mercy Care. Silver sponsors Calvary Healing Center, Clean Slate, Friends, Teen Challenge of Arizona, Together AZ Newspaper. Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee, host of the podcast Escaping Rock Bottom. We have a great special report to bring you tonight. Stephanie Siete with Community Bridges is here to talk about the opiate crisis and just substance abuse issues that we are dealing with, especially here in Arizona, how we can try to prevent our youth from experimenting with some of these very dangerous drugs that are out there, but also how we can help save lives. So Stephanie Siete with Community Bridges, it's always good to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just dig right into it. Let's talk about the different kind of chemicals that are out there on the street, the black market, that are so easily accessible right now to our youth.
And that's the problem. Everything's accessible. And I think that should be a big takeaway for people watching this, especially parents, is that drugs don't discriminate. Kids can get their hands on absolutely everything. I know drugs hit everybody, but what I'm really trying to emphasize is we want to prevent this from the hands of children and via social media, the internet, their friends, older brothers, sisters, people that they know. The opioid crisis hasn't gone away. It's gotten worse, right? We'll obviously talk about fentanyl. Vaping's everywhere. And I think that's like a precursor because there's 15,000 flavors that are cakes and desserts and ice cream, and a 10-year-old can do that. And I think I scare a lot of people that I'm so direct and honest about this, but anything goes. I mean, meth can look like a lollipop. It's a whole new world of drugs.
And I love that you say that drugs don't discriminate, because it's really important that parents and even wealthy communities like the Paradise Valleys and the Scottsdales, that just because you live in an affluent neighborhood doesn't mean that drugs are not easily, readily available for those kids. And I always tell people, I grew up in a very affluent part of California, in Orange County, California. It was actually easier for me to get my hands on drugs because our parents were giving us so much cash as a weekly stipend to live. So just because you live in an affluent community, don't think that your child is shielded from some of the drugs that are out there on the streets, because we're about to get into some social media that all kids have these days, how easily accessible it is just to log on to social media and get that. But when we talked about some of those chemicals of concern, we are still in a pandemic where a lot of communities or towns are going back to the stay-at-home orders. I always like to tell people the opposite of addiction is connection. And when people don't have the ability to connect with stay-at-home orders, working from home, a lot of times, as we're about to show people, substance abuse has skyrocketed during the pandemic.
Sure. It's so sad. It's so depressing. 100% the opposite of addiction is connection. And when we're isolated, not with our friends, and we're scared, pandemic hit and no one knew what to do, and we're still in the middle of it. So depression, fear, isolation, how do we cope? A lot of the times people will turn to substances, and some of the stuff's right in our home, right? You can open up a medicine cabinet. Like I said, friends, family members, things that are around. The reality is we saw this huge spike. When I talk about outcomes, no, we don't want any deaths, but there's been consistent deaths over the years. It's been on the rise. It's really never decreased. We were hovering around 70,000 dead people every single year from drug overdose deaths, and that's awful. But new data just came out that during 2020, over 93,000 people died in this country from drug overdoses. And in my eyes, these are preventable deaths. And I think that's why we're having this conversation, right? Like heightening awareness, knowledge, so people know how to intervene. It's already there. That's why I said intervene, because it's happening at earlier and earlier ages. And again, we could tie mental health into this. We're all suffering. We've got to find better resolutions so that we can decrease these numbers. I hope next year that's a big decrease. Like I said, it was a 20,000 increase. I hope next year it's a major decrease.
And people, yeah, and I hope so too. And my fear is that the numbers are going to continue to be around that 90,000 to 100,000 until we're on the other side of this pandemic and the virus is totally gone and our lives have found that normalcy again. But people also need to know that people can cope in so many different ways, right? It could be gambling, it could be porn addiction, it could be food addiction, right? You're just constantly in the cupboards eating your feelings, trying to figure out a way to comfort yourself. So it's all about finding ways to treat that depression, treat the anxiety, and get those resources out to the people who are isolating right now. I do want to talk about some of the teen trends. And,
Sure.
and we've already kind of briefly touched on vaping and all the different flavors that are out there, really targeting kids. Why is vaping so dangerous for somebody who is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old?
Exactly. And that's why I said chemicals of concern. So there's so many different chemicals found. You could have nicotine products. You could have marijuana products. You could vape fentanyl if you really wanted to. I think that's another takeaway. There's no right or wrong way to do drugs. People learned quickly that pills could be contaminated. Well, so could liquids. So I think that's just another eye opener for individuals. And I always break things just down to basics and common sense. If you're a young developing body and brain, what kind of chemicals do you really need? The answer is none. Like, we want kids to grow and develop, get life opportunity experience. And I don't mean just at 18, 25 years of age and up, like, okay, I've got some life experience under my belt. Maybe I can make some better decisions. But if we're stunting developmentally and growth, all chemicals can be dangerous. But when it comes to the vapes, I mean, again, just common sense talking it out. Back in the day, someone smoked and like ashed out a cigarette. Whereas today, when you're done, you're finishing a pod.
Right.
So like one pod is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes.
The amount of nicotine that is in that pod is equivalent to the amount of nicotine that is in
so it looks and smells better, but it doesn't mean it's safer. And if this is a 13-year-old, if this is a 10-year-old, if this is a 17-year-old, and they roll over, out of bed in the morning, they reach into their nightstand and they grab like their candy, ice cream, cocoa,
bubble gum, peanut butter and jelly.
Anything. I know.
Yeah. Like, what? I was like, somebody was vaping around me one time and it smelled legit like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And I was like, why am I smelling a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? But what they've found too is that a lot of those flavors with the chemicals they're using to create that flavor is really what's doing a lot of that damage, which I think they've ripped menthol off of all store shelves too.
They're supposed to. They're trying to.
Although you can still go to a couple of gas stations around here and they're still selling the menthol.
You're always going to be able to find this stuff.
You will always be able to. When the statistic that even shocked me, and I'm somebody who's like immersed in drug addiction and recovery, is that 70% of kids are going to try vaping.
Just for the flavors.
Just for the flavors.
Like
if you made Virginia tobacco, which is one of the flavors put out there because it's like Virginia tobacco.
Sure.
A lot of kids aren't going to like that because it tastes like old school tobacco.
Yeah.
And it's not flavored with bubble gum.
Yeah.
And so where are we on the fight on that?
I think that's one of the biggest fights that's out there. There's so many different flavor bans.
And black markets available for those things.
Oh, I was going to say... Okay, so you like we talk about the flavors. There's so many things on my mind right here. Tobacco smells nasty. Someone could walk up behind me. It's a very distinct smell, and you knew that over the years. But then again, 15,000 different candies and flavors. You can see why it's happening in a school, why someone gets away with it. So use is more prevalent. Think of it that way. You can't, hey, teacher, let me take out a cigarette and light it up. It's not flying like that.
No.
But you can take out a vape and do it when they look the other way. You exhale into your sleeve, by your backpack or your locker, what have you. More frequency, more potency, more use equals quicker addiction in teenage brains. That's, I think, some of the bigger concerns. If we're really breaking this down to basics, we can't just turn a blind eye and be okay with what's happening into teen bodies. And that's why we just need to be knowledgeable about this stuff. So there are initiatives where people are trying to reduce this, limit sales, right? Just have only old school tobacco.
Right.
Because
and get rid of all those other flavors because there's just like even additive flavors to those pods.
And I'll just say Phoenix, there's like Phoenix is doing, the city of Phoenix was trying to, but Flavors Hooks Kids. .org and then Flavors Hook Kids Phoenix.org. There's websites where parents can just log in, learn the stats that we're talking about.
Yeah. So let's talk now about marijuana. And this is where it gets even tricky for all of us who are in the drug treatment world, is that marijuana is being used for good. It's being used
100.
to help people who do suffer from PTSD, right? which we're going to talk about, you got the CBDs, a derivative from that is non-psychoactive, right? And it's not a drug. It does not get you high.
No, it doesn't get you high at
You
all.
also have CBN, which is also withdrawn from that is helping, that doctors are using for people to help them sleep in a natural way. So the issue that's coming with marijuana right now is then you have all these people talking about the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. So a kid's going to be like, well, give me a joint. Like, that's good for me. And it's not. So
there's the confusion again, right? I'm 13, I'm 15 years old, and let's go full circle. We're talking about chemicals, and you just listed some of them.
Well, my teenage nephews made a comment to a family member saying, well, Brandon's using CBD, he's using CBN, that's all coming from THC, why can't I take it? And I'm like, there goes the education. And it's about the education of getting them to understand, no, smoking marijuana, you're taking in THC,
100%.
and at a young age, that will stunt your brain growth.
And I think sometimes you have to use the word marijuana as the umbrella and all the little chemicals that fall underneath it, right? Because we can say no psychoactive response, no high with CBD. Then we can flip over to THC and say this is what causes the high. And the potency of THC has gone through the roof over decades. Yeah. And you see that. And I like to show charts to show people it wasn't like some 2 to 3% jump. We're talking maybe 2 to 3% potency 30, 40 years ago, upwards of 80, 90% potency today. If I say things like crystal, people, oh, well, crystal meth. No, there's crystal forms of marijuana. So the formats have changed, the potencies have changed, the availability. It is education. Mm-hmm. We can't just turn a blind eye and say, well, back in the day I did this, so it's okay.
Right.
It's different
totally.
Today.
Well, listen, the ecstasy and everybody who doesn't know my story, you can go read my book and know my story. I was going to raves at age 16, 17 doing ecstasy. Now, the ecstasy that was back in the early 90s is much different than the Molly that the kids are out there taking now, which we're eventually going to get into is a lot of the fentanyl. And let's talk about the opioid epidemic with that, because the opioid epidemic is insane right now, and especially when we talk about the synthetic opioids like the fentanyl that is out there. There is the fentanyl that some people, it's interesting, Stephanie, because some people come at me pretty hard, people who are dealing with pain, and their doctors are giving them fentanyl, and they're saying that I am making it harder for them to get their pain-relieving drugs. It is different than the fentanyl that is being laced in all of these other drugs.
Yeah. You know what? I'll just, again, real direct on this. There's no vanilla drugs anymore.
Correct.
There's no plain marijuana and plain meth and plain heroin.
It's not.
Heroin's on the decline, the plain kind, right? The vanilla. But the heroin mixed with the fentanyl is through the roof.
Crystal meth.
Yep. The methamphetamine fentanyl through the roof. If people don't understand, if there's one takeaway from this conversation is that drugs can be any format.
Yes.
The potencies are crazy and they're all mixed. Everything is cut together. We talked about 93,000 people died last year from drug overdose deaths. Over 60% of those deaths were synthetic opioids like fentanyl. So the reality is most people are dying from this. And people go, death, okay. They think hard immediately. Opioids suppress our breathing. We need to breathe. And I'm telling you right now, sure, pain-related, people are treated, managed with opioids. We always say, you don't want to take them full term. You don't want to take this forever. You want to wean yourself off of this stuff because it can be physically addicting, right? And so, oh my gosh, if you've been using days and weeks and months and years and you try to stop, you're going to go through that nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, muscle pain, bone pain, tremors, and shakes that can be weeks, if not a month of time. And you're like, wait a minute, I feel like this because I stopped using? They're going to want to keep using. So they weaken that respiratory system. And boy, have we not been talking about respiratory systems this last year. We need to be the healthiest we can be. And if we suppress our breathing, sometimes it can be fatal. So much so the majority of those people dying are dying from opioids. Yeah,
we were just saying, whether it's 90 or 93,000 people dying from a drug overdose, those synthetic opioids, the most popular one right now, of course, is fentanyl, is leading to 60% of those deaths. And, I recently did a story about this mother here in the Valley and her 15-year-old son. This was a kid. He was a star football player. Okay. And he went clothes shopping. He went to the mall. And parents had the conversations with little Isaiah saying, don't do drugs, don't do fentanyl. What they didn't understand was that and we're going to talk about this in another episode, is that how social media is in this game, making it so readily accessible. But nobody is talking about some of the underlying traumatic events that are happening in these children's lives that are going, that are not being looked at. So whether there's a divorce, if your child is being bullied, if your child is LGBTQ in middle school and they know that, that is setting them up for being bullied. And the moment they have a chance to escape and they feel that numb feeling, it just feels better than being bullied. It feels better than mom and dad going through a divorce.
There's so many reasons kids try. There's so many reasons people try drugs: to feel different, to feel numb, to feel something. You know what I mean? There's not one be all end all. We wouldn't be having this conversation if there was. Like, I always appreciate that you take the time to talk about even the flip side, the prevention, the front side versus the recovery. We really hope that people can get through their trauma, their heartache, can make it okay. But right now, I'm not afraid to say this, that kids, anyone, you do not know what you're getting nowadays.
No,
it's
you
not
don't.
worth the risk.
No.
You see all kind of the messages that one pill can kill you. You do not know today. And it's not just pills, like I said, it's liquids, things being coated and mixed with everything. This is just the culture that we live in right now with drugs.
And little Isaiah took one fentanyl pill.
One.
He thought it was Oxy, right? People always say, "Oh, this is Oxy. This is Oxy." Well, kid don't know when you're hooking up with a drug dealer who you just met on Instagram because they had a little plug as their symbol, being their connection. You know, you sit there and ask them. I'm like, unless you have a fentanyl strip in front of you and readily available to test said drug, you're never going to know what you're taking.
No.
Little Isaiah took that pill. He ended up dead an hour later, right? And mom found out because mom was responsible managing his social media accounts, and she got the alert because his friends took a picture of him overdosed. That's how mom found out her son was dead. And he took one pill. Now, she spoke to him about not taking drugs. And this gets into, I come from a belief, Stephanie, that it takes an entire community to educate our children about drug use. The sole responsibility cannot just be on the parents. Nope. Because if we put the sole responsibility on mom and dad, getting your kids not to use drugs, we will fail. Okay? It's going to take drugs being taught in our schools.
100%.
And getting some of our lawmakers in our state to understand that this does need to be taught in schools. We need to have a class once a week or once a day. I don't care if it's 30 minutes.
Mandatory, because the responsibility can't just lie on the parents. Why? Because many parents right now are working 2 or 3 jobs to put food on the table. Many of these parents can't go to their kids' soccer games, which doesn't allow every parent to have a good connection with their child. And if mom and dad don't have a good connection, not just the role of I'm your parent, do what I say, in that kind of relationship, that talk about using drugs can backfire. If there's no connection.
If there's no connection between mom and dad and child.
And sometimes I hate to say it too, but parents aren't informed. Do you know what I mean?
No.
We don't meet in the middle. Like, kids are at schools and they're hearing all this information, their social media, what they're watching on TV, what they've learned. And parents over here like, what are you saying? So they don't have the conversation. And think about social norms. If you're going to allow your kid to learn social norms, again, from social media, from their friends, from the movies that they're watching, you better be over here on the flip side, not just as the parent, but surrounding them with that protective bubble of your social norms. What the coach says, what the counselor says, what the grandparents say. Positive adult role model like myself. I don't have kids, but my biggest claim to fame is I love being that positive adult role model to other people's kids.
And sometimes, Stephanie, you'll be able to break through to a child more than their actual parent.
Yeah.
Because sometimes kids resent their parents because if mom and dad don't show up to their soccer game, if mom and dad miss a school recital, guess what? The little ones, the little kids, they're upset. But sometimes somebody who's not their parent can actually break through to a child, which is one of the reasons why there was a charter school here in the Valley and they found cocaine. They were finding pills on campus. The principal, and I give her so much credit. She's 35 years old. She's a school principal. And she says, you know what, Brandon, I need you to come to our school and have a hard talk. And I said, what's off limits? She goes, nothing is off limits. You tell them everything. And I said, well, You want me to tell them everything? I will. And I said, but what if they go home and say, Mom and Dad, this guy, Brandon, came here talking about this, and this. What if it backfires? She goes, I don't care. I run this school. This is my school.
Yep.
I found drugs on my campus. You break through to them.
Yeah.
You need to tell them what happens.
They need that real talk. And I ask that before I go to school. So I'm like, as long as you give me the reins to say the truth and the reality and don't restrict me and don't hold me back. And I will kind of share when you said, maybe they'll share more with me during this pandemic. I cannot tell you how many parents, given they're my friends, people I know from the gym or what have you, can my kid call you? Can I set up a talk with my kid and you?
That's what I get.
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah.
That's what I get.
I love it though, because I'm like, let's just do it. Let's just talk.
Because it takes a village. We cannot solve this by putting the onus on parents. Now, granted, parents have a responsibility. As you said, if your child at age 13 or 14, if you are allowing them to be on Snapchat, you're allowing them to be on Instagram, then as a parent, you absolutely have the responsibility to be educated by all the lingo that is out there. You cannot, as a generation of the 70s, sit there and go, I know everything there is to know about drugs. I'll have that talk with my kid. It's like you speak in Farsi to them.
Yeah.
Like they don't even understand that language. You need an interpreter.
That's why
which is where that education comes in.
Yeah. We've talked about this, you and I, that I don't do the whole just say no, because that doesn't work in any capacity.
No.
I'm all about be in the know.
Be in the know. I love that.
Be knowledgeable.
Yeah.
So that you can engage. I'm like, maybe I'm selfish. I want to know everything. Like I want to go to every seminar to learn knowledge so that I can speak eloquently on topics. So I just think that that's important. And that's why we're doing this. Like this is just a segment of what we're doing for this whole National Drug and Alcohol Recovery Month. So I'm really sure I'm with CBI, but this is a part of CARE, Celebrate the Art of Recovery Expo. And a lot of people who watch this will know this has been going on for a long time. And we're just taking it a step further, making it a little more virtual, visual, conversational. There's going to be a couple series here for people to get educated. And then we're going to celebrate that recovery.
Right.
Because people do make it. I mean, again, working for Community Bridges, Inc., we know over 75% of our employees are in recovery themselves. That's why they do what they do. And I'm just blessed that they trust me enough to be a spokesperson for them and just highlight those resources. We want to help people. We want to save lives. I mean, again, said it already. We wouldn't be doing this if we had the answers. There's so many factors out there that are hurting people, but we want to be able to help.
And we always say, right, there's no magic bullet to end this crisis. We have to use every modality and the advancements of science to really go at this, and we have to use everybody and their resources for it. And as we kind of begin to close on this segment, that people need to know this, and I just find this so interesting, this statistic, is that the U.S., right, is 5%. We are just 5% of the world's population. How much opiates are we consuming?
Sadly, over 80%. I may say that to people. I'm like, I know we come across as big, tough U.S., but in size, we're not that big.
No, we're 5%.
We only take up 5% of the world's population. And if you really look into it, some will say like 4.7. We're a small population, but we don't deal with trauma, anxiety, depression, stress very well. We consume all the opioids to feel better about ourselves. And I think we've got to find other modalities, other ways to help cope.
Because you know what? And I can safely say this, that we have just become a lazy society and we want the quick fix to everything.
Oh, I say it all the time. Like,
and
people
recovering from
weight,
mental health. Recovering from mental health is not a quick fix.
Not at all.
It's not. I mean, I'm almost 12 years recovered. I do therapy 3 hours a week to recover from mental health. It's an ongoing...
Self-care is important.
Self-care is so important. And there is nothing out there. Just like you can't send your child to treatment for 30 days thinking that they're going to come back cured. It is called the continuum of care post-treatment.
Yeah.
You don't just go to rehab, come back and be cured.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
That's why our third segment will be about self-care in recovery and just the different resources, modalities, therapies, and things that you can do to stay in recovery.
Right.
Because it doesn't just snap one day like, I'm sober, I'm fine. It's an ongoing life process.
And
decision.
I'm all about like, listen, there's a menu of options that are out there. Go devour the menu.
Yeah.
Find something and a few things that'll work for you. But I love, like I always say, I love the work that Community Bridges does in our community. It's so important. Education's a huge part of it. And I will lobby. I will do whatever it takes to make this as part of the curriculum in our public schools.
I support that.
We need it to happen. So maybe that'll be our next mission, is pulling some of these lawmakers aside and getting them to understand we won't solve this problem until we get it forced inside the classrooms as well.
Educational life skills, not
That's
the
what I
stuff
mean.
that they learn on the playground. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Because they're going to get exposed, but they also
Absolutely.
need something to back it up in the classroom that says reality education, life matters.
Absolutely. Stephanie Siete with Community Bridges out there doing the good work. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And thank you for checking out this episode of Escaping Rock Bottom, and enjoy the CARE event. Celebrate the Art of Recovery Expo CARE 2021 sponsors. Presented by Community Bridges. Partner, Whom Copy. Platinum sponsors. Arizona Women's Recovery Center. Molina Healthcare. Mercy Care. Silver sponsors. Calvary Healing Center. Clean Slate. Friends. Teen Challenge of Arizona. Together AZ Newspaper.